Okay, last time I was talking about the physician scientist named George Minot. Remember, he's a grew up very wealthy, had all the family connections um, guiding him along the way, and through that became a very successful physician. And what we found was at the age of 35, he's diagnosed with diabetes. It's 1921, he has diabetes, and things are looking grim. Now, I want to tell you about another physician from that same era. This man's name is Fred Banting. He was born in 1891, 6 years after George Minot. He was the sixth child born to his parents, but he grew up with only three older brothers and an older sister, because one of his older brothers, died whooping cough when Fred was just an infant. So Fred is born in a farmhouse outside of Alliston, Ontario, a very rural area. It's a few hundred miles from Toronto, just a farming community. It was a simple house with no indoor plumbing, unlike where George Minot lived. Fred's father was a farmer. His brothers all became farmers. His grandfather was a farmer. So, as you can see, Fred comes from a family of farmers. Now compare that to George Minot, whose family were all physicians, professors at Harvard, leaders in the community of Boston. So Fred grows up as a simple kid on a farm. And Fred struggles with school. When he was in fifth grade, there's kind of a famous story. The teacher asked him a question and he was embarrassed because he couldn't answer it. So he just stormed off, left school, went home, told his father, "That's it, I'm giving up school," and which wasn't that unusual for farmers at the time. None of them really finished high school. Fred's father really valued education, and so he told Fred, "Why, that's fine. We'll be needing an extra man, and there is plenty of work to do around the farm. It's too bad that you can never be anything more useful in the world than a laborer, but a good, honest worker is all right. Think it over, and in the meantime, put on your overalls and clean out the hen house." So Fred went and cleaned out the hen house, but he went back to school the next day because he got a taste of that labor and decided he'd be better off going to school. When high school came along, Fred made the unusual choice for a farmer to attend high school. Most farm boys quit school after the 8th grade and started to work on the farm full time. The high school was mostly filled with children who lived in the town. Those children had parents who were doctors or bakers or lawyers or had non-farm jobs. And in high school, Fred's grades were mixed. He excelled in chemistry, but struggled in Latin, French, and English composition. Fred was always horrible at spelling, and that carried over into any subject that was based on words. But he managed to graduate from high school in 1910. So in the fall of 1910, he enters Victoria College. Victoria College was part of the University of Toronto. I mentioned this before, but so when you go to college in 1910, you pretty much don't have a choice of what you take. There'll be different colleges. So there's the University of Toronto, which has different colleges, and each college focuses on a particular set of coursework. And so he entered Victoria College, which was kind of a general education college, and required a number of different courses that he passed. So in the first year, he didn't pass all the courses. He struggled with French. And so he couldn't move on to the second year of courses. So he comes home after the first year of college. He's not so happy, but decides to make a go of it again, and so goes back for his second year of college. Gets about halfway through the second year and can tell things aren't going well. So he's in his second year of college, repeating the first year, at Victoria College at the University of Toronto and decides to drop out. And so what does he do when he drops out? Well, he's just going to drop out and go to medical school. See, I told you medical school in the 1910 or so is very different than it is now. The medical school at the University of Toronto didn't require a 4-year degree. It was just much more practical and directed training towards being a physician. So that's Fred's choice. He decides, well, I'll just drop out of Victoria College and enroll in the medical school at the University of Toronto in the fall. So the fall of 1912, he enters the University of Toronto Medical School, and he took classes in anatomy, physiology, surgery, and things like that. But Fred was mostly interested in surgery. At the time when he entered, this was supposed to be a 5-year program leading to a bachelor's type degree in medicine. So he enters in 1912. He expects to be completed in 1917. But something came up. In the summer of 1914, World War I began in Europe, and Canada, being part of the British Empire, was carried right into that war. So Fred joins the Canadian Army, and his medical school program gets accelerated by a year or so. And he spends part of his time taking classes, but also treating wounded soldiers at a Toronto hospital. In early 1917, Fred is sent to Europe as part of the Canadian Army. And he ends up as a medical officer in France, triaging wounded soldiers. In fact, during the war, in what was called the Second Battle of Cambrai, he was hit with shrapnel from an artillery shell. The shrapnel embedded itself in his arm, which didn't appear at first to be a major injury, but it became infected. And these were the times before penicillin, and an infection could be deadly. There was talk for a while that his arm might have to be amputated. But the infection eventually cleared itself, and he fully recovered. After the war, he returned to Toronto, where he had a 1-year surgical training position at the Hospital for Sick Children. This was similar to George Minot's position at the Massachusetts General Hospital. Remember where George Minot got that because his father was on the staff there and was one of the people deciding who would be hired. So Fred's in this a pretty nice training position. He's being trained as a surgeon. He's kind of excited to begin a career as this innovative surgeon. At the time, surgeons were inventing new procedures all the time. He thought that when the training period ended, he could secure a position as a staff surgeon at that hospital in Toronto. However, when the training period ended, there were no openings for surgeons at the hospital. And Fred, coming from a family of farmers, had no family connections that could help him out the way George Minot did. So Fred was on his own. His dreams of becoming an innovative surgeon just came crashing down. He really had no alternative besides opening up an office and looking for patients. So he moved to London, Ontario, a small city about 100 miles from Toronto, and opened a practice. He simply puts up a sign saying he's a physician, unlocks the door, and waits for patients to arrive. Not many did. There's records from his first month there. He just saw a few patients. One was interested in a prescription for alcohol. Why? Well, because at the time, it was prohibition in Ontario. You couldn't sell alcohol. And the patient who walked into Fred's office was throwing a party that weekend. Fred Banting's life was chronicled in several books and movies. Here's one movie called Glory Enough for All. It was a made-for-TV movie, filmed in 1988 and shown in the United States on the PBS network in 1989. I'll be showing several scenes from this film to illustrate Fred's life.
The fact of the matter is, we only have so many places to film. Turning down excellent men is a loathsome task. I have no choice. Your abilities are not in question, you understand. You're a fine, competent surgeon, respected by colleagues, well liked by your patients. I'm sorry.
Then why?
It's everyone's ambition, it seems, house surgeons, med students, interns, to secure a staff position at Sick Children's. Only the most exceptional can be considered.
Oh, that was my future.
There are other hospitals.
Well, the Toronto General isn't what I have in mind.
I don't know about there either. Medicine doesn't begin and end standing over an operating table in this province. It may not be as glamorous, but there's nothing wrong with being a general practitioner. There are towns all over the province needing good doctors. Sometimes expectations have to be lowered.
So, what do you think?
It's a wonderful milestone. It's a very important day.
So, this is it. Banting's descent into purgatory. Jesus. Oh, sorry.
Time will heal.
As will Dr. Banting. Now, this is where the citizenry of London will wait to see the great Dr. Banting. And this is the inner sanctum sanctorum, where I will perform miracles. Desk over there, seminary table there, and the bookcase over there. Now, I will live in the room across the hallway, and I'll pray to God I'll make enough money to pay the goddamn mortgage, loan from my father, and the cost of the bloody car. Morning. Morning. Ah, morning. Who's first?